Alright, so as with so many other times when I make a video for Crossout, the topic of today is going to be a continuation of a discussion that occurred on the Reddit. So yesterday we had this bad boy posted by Altruistic Garage, and it's an example of a extremely durable worm build. So probably the highest durability value I've seen on a build for, you know, non-Leviathan that's been posted on the Reddit before. So that is a lot of health. Basically, the discussion around it, we don't even need most of this stuff, was me pointing out that you'd be able to do it by fusing for mass, not using bumpers or passive melee weapons, as they do not contribute to the cabin durability, and being confirmed by the OP. But the conversation that I continued having with Alogalos was based off of the sort of antithesis to a prior idea. So this was actually by Alogalos about half a year ago, and was basically exploring the idea of running damage pass-through parts to soak damage before the Ermac cabin's build actually takes direct health damage, and as a result proccing its cabin perk more frequently without risk of actually taking as much as full damage. Because the Ermac's perk is that it gives more vehicle resistance for the entire build whenever the cabin takes damage, so this allows you to soak some of the damage with damage pass-through parts while still causing the cabin to be tickled. So, talked about it at length. I actually did another video that showed my exploration of the topic. The build of which was inspired by Alogalos, as I'm literally saying in the stream right here in the video right now. And I made it for my clanmate who's continued to use it since. But this is very much going the opposite route and having full health tank value. So my point was that you could probably achieve a higher value anyway, since the Ermac isn't the heaviest cabin we have, nor theoretically the one where the direct health value matters the most. So the purpose of the video today is basically me exploring that idea. Now, as per usual, this is probably going to get pretty math heavy, at least theoretically. I don't know if it'll actually end up being that way in game. Luckily for me, I already have the structural part calculator, which has recorded all of the durability values in the game and their ratios compared to other statistics. I also have most of those items myself unlocked, so the only ones I'm missing are 3 of the famine ones, and then 2 of the ones from the current battle pass, in addition to the ones that have been accidentally added and then, you know, taken out immediately after, and then of course 2 plows. But actually this is something I own now and actually have the correct value of. So it's fun. In any case, the bumper doesn't really apply because we're going to be looking at things that only add directly to the cabin health. So probably the easiest way to look at this to begin with is going to be looking at the cabins. So for instance, for the cabins that we currently have in the game, the Ermac is in the faster lane of cabins compared to the other heavier ones with a slower speed. So as a result, its available mass, which is its total mass, the mass limit divided or minus the mass of the item itself, gives you the available mass. So in this case, anything that gives more total mass and or synergizes better with a build that is particularly focusing on having durability be cabin durability rather than vehicle durability, is going to be a valid option for us. So in this case, the Hugin is nearly tied. I don't even have it unlocked. Then the other contenders are going to be the heavier set of cabins as well as the light legendary, well, light or heavy legendary. So the options are pretty straightforward in my eyes, because for the sake of having actual durability count matter, we don't really care about the humpback, because it's A, not the highest value, and B, it doesn't care what is the source of the damage it takes. We don't care about the Yokozuna because it's like a rush one. Oops. So we really only have 3 options for cabins that are going to hypothetically have more available mass and thus more armoring potential. Now, the Cohort and Machinist both have a lot more available mass than the Bastion, and that also means that it's going to scale better when we look at a mass fusion or durability fusion, theoretically, because it'll have more mass and therefore more total durability with the 10% buff increase. But I do have a particular fancy for the Bastion and the Machinist anyway, since they are the cabins who actually care about the number at the bottom of your screen rather than just, you know, the survivability aspect. So we do have a theoretical best contender, which is going to be the Cohort cabin. And the Cohort, as basically a upsized Ermac, is probably going to make the most sense to use in a similar format to the original poster, which is going to be as a worm build on augers, weapons behind the cabin using the cabin to tank. Whereas the Bastion Machinist builds are going to generally look very, very, very different, because one of them is wanting to use the positioning of weapons near on the cabin to increase their strength, but doesn't necessarily want to cabin tank the damage, and the other one, the Bastion, is all about the cabin tanking, but doesn't have a whole lot of options for damage resistance on the side or back, and thus would not really prefer a worm build, since you'd want to have your weapons always facing forward. So, I don't even know why this is at. Gonna assume I just mistyped it. So yeah, the Bastion, the Cohort, and the Machinist are going to be the big ones to test for today, methinks. Now, there are some additional variables that are pertinent here. Reason being just the items that I have, or the variant of those items that I have available to me. So in this case, the Bastion, like I said, is the lowest, Machinist is mid, and then the Cohort is the highest for available mass. But in my inventory, the fusion for the Cohort is not decreasing its mass cost nor increasing its mass limit. So the fact that I have both of those on a Bastion fusion is going to assist with closing the distance pretty quickly. And additionally, the Machinist that came from the Battle Pass had the mass limit fusion already on it, whereas this one is from a Battle Pass and does not have the mass limit fusion. So in theory, the Machinist with the mass fusion from the Battle Pass will have a higher available mass to begin with. If you went and fused the Cohort anyway, then the Cohort is going to win out again, although the difference between the two is very, very small. Literally 100 kilos. But it means if we look at running all of them, so running all the vehicles with a plus mass engine, the available mass, sorry, it would be over here then with the width mass engine, the available mass for the machinist is going to be 21,200. With the cohort, it's going to be 2,300. Whoops, 21,300. And with the Bastion, it's not going to be its base value because we actually have a mass and weight fusion. So that actually narrows the gap quite a bit. So from like a percentile difference perspective, this is pretty damn close. That being said, of course, if I did have mass fusions on the cohort, could bump it up to as high as almost 25,000, which is obviously a pretty significant difference. For the sake of using what I have available and staying true to the spirit of the post, which was a worm build, I will start off with a cohort. But I think I mean, it's already kind of late. It's nearly midnight where I am. I don't know whether or not I'll do it this video, but I would also like to play around with the Bastion because it's a very enjoyed cabin by me, and I've used it in a lot of different builds, so I already kind of have an idea of what I'd be doing with it for this. And it also, like I said, alongside the machinist, really loves having that durability bar directly increase rather than overall vehicle durability. I will say the machinist does as well, theoretically, but that's only up to the max of 3,500 durability, and we're looking at least doubling that, so it doesn't matter to it as much. And then of course the cohort is just ever so slightly beating it out for the sake of the available mass. So I will probably be looking at most these two. Of course, a bunch of other factors are going to be at play, so the fusions I have for the weapons that I select, or modules or movement parts, or lack thereof, since I don't have very many movement parts fused, etc. So that's to say that this is going to be a very rough outline of what that max mass, and thus the max amount of armor, and thus the max amount of durability you can actually have will look like, because there's going to be a couple of other differences in the end that will change things. So we will be looking at the structural list. Once I have a part count, we can actually this is funny too, because this is something that's been discussed in the original thread for the structural part calculator, is using it for I thought it was discussed here, but maybe not. Somebody discussed it at one point, that they'd be interested in using it for the sake of... Could have sworn it was here. Anyway, using it for very much the sake of what we're discussing here, which is effectively using it to determine for a given part count for a given amount of armor or durability you're wanting to aim for, or power score limitation, whatever. You'd be able to theoretically filter a list like this does, and then further have it prioritize and do the actual count of stuff. So I'm just going to set this to effective durability of part from high to low, not including bumpers. So actually we need raw durability because while the parts with damage pass-through will be able to soak more damage relative to the amount of durability they have, we only care about ones that actually increase the bar at the bottom. So yeah, I'm not going to jump straight into this because there's going to be a couple of other considerations. So to begin with, we'll look at sort of what we're wanting in this build. So I'm going to slap down a frame because of course we're going to guarantee to have at least one frame. I think I'll also shout out, might as well, that the worm build ideas have been thoroughly explored by Bang Shield. So I actually have a couple of prior videos on the topic, but I wouldn't go and say that I'm like a master worm builder by any means. So a lot of what I'm going to be doing is going to be rather rough based off of my personal, rather limited experience with it, rather than saying, you know, I've played Worms for ages and know the best way to do everything. That's not going to be the case at all. So it's going to be a little touch and go. And as I mentioned in the original thread too, I'm aiming to make a higher durability value. I can't actually guarantee that it will be a better build. So with that in mind, start the cohort. Now, this fusion does still help us quite a bit because the 10% durability fusion applies to all armor that is applying to the cabin's health pool. So for instance, the APC parts, which we'll probably be using quite a lot of, has a durability of 138, but when I add it to the vehicle, it's going to do more than 138 durability because it has the plus 10%. So that's obviously extremely helpful for increasing the value. Now, again, under theoretical ideal circumstances, if you're just wanting to max out the bar at the bottom, you'd probably be looking at having the plus durability. But in theory, depending on how the math works out, minus mass might be better because you could have more mass worth of armor put on. Resistance to damage could mean more overall health, even if the physical number's lower. So that's, you know, I don't know what the actual answer would be because I haven't gone and done all of the durability / resistance to damage calculations to determine what is the best method, but there are a few routes you could go there, but pretty much unequivocally you'd want handling to have the plus 10% mass limit, especially when you're looking at these monstrous values to begin with, the 24,000. Another 2,400 kilos is going to be pretty significant compared to, say, using a smaller, lighter cabin. Going from 9,000 to 9,900 is not going to be more than like 3-4 pieces of armor. So we know we'll be running the cohort. Since we're running a meat grinder build, we can pretty much guarantee we'll be using the Geagle as an engine. Now, again, if we were to min-max even further, we could theoretically have the Geagle have reduced mass and then increased mass limit. But for the sake of that upgrade being stupidly small amount in the mass limit, it's only 3%. So 75 more max mass. Not a huge deal in my eyes. My personal preferences for the fusions is having the Colossus be maxed out on power, since it is the highest power giving engine, and then having that have reduced mass because it has the better mass ratio anyway due to having lower mass than the Geagle. Whereas with the Geagle, I have plus speed on it so that it's effective for a very slightly wider option of cabins for increasing the speed up to the next barrier of tracks or omnis or whatnot, and then an increase to durability because it's large enough. I generally use it as armor. So if you were making this build, again maximizing explicitly for durability, you would probably instead want the extra 75 points of a mass limit increase, and you probably want to save the 75 points or whatever the math actually works out to be of saving mass on this item itself. So again, this is not ideal circumstances at all. Maybe, again, depending on how complex the calculation gets for this, I could do a hypothetical mock-up of what that would look like with the changed values, but in any case, for the time being, I'm not going to mention it for every part, but just saying that pretty much every part is going to have a factor on the amount of mass you have, the amount of part count you have, and thus the amount of armor you can put on. So all of these things will affect the end value, probably not by enormous amounts other than the mass fusion on the cohort, but they will add up. So knowing that we're doing the Geagle and the cohort because we're wanting to go with the worm style build and tank with the cabin, it's pretty easy to know that I want to go with meat grinders. Now, I don't actually know if I have enough meat grinders for this. Generally, I just use the amount needed to hit the very end of the bar, the red. Looks like I might need to use more than 6 augers. Yeah, so I don't actually have 7 augers. This is extremely close to the limit anyway, so I'm not going to be too worried about it. But again, hypothetically, you go higher and fix that. Likewise, if we slap on Grizzly, it'll give us another 3% cabin mass limit, and that'll bump it from 26,500 to 27,220. But again, for the sake of my mass limit being 26,000, I'm not going to go any higher on that. Now, for the sake of making it a worm build, probably going to want the majority of the frames behind. I'm also not sure how wide or long this build's going to end up looking. I do have the example of a prior 6 auger build with the triple whirls on the humpback, but we're going to be looking more heavily at armoring this time than using some of the melee components or passive melee, the passive melee weapons or bumpers in this build. And also we're probably not going to be wanting to look at the whirls due to how heavy they are for the sake of, again, maxing out with the mass. So pretty much guaranteed we're also going to want to look at having an Apollo on this build. I'm just slapping these parts down wherever because I'm not actually sure what it'll end up looking like. As I've gone over in quite a few builds before, generally I pick all of the parts that I know I'll use in a build from the non-armor, non-decorative, non-sticker perspective, and then I will go and put them together once I have sort of a rough outline of the parts and where they need to be and whatnot. So this is going to be a process. For the sake of weapons, the one that would give us the best part limit count would by far be the Avalanche, because then we'd only have one weapon worth of parts being used rather than 2, 3, 4. But A, that thing is extremely heavy, and B, I have no idea how you'd even get to using it on a worm build somewhat effectively, if at all, because this thing is going to have terrible, of course we're vision. This thing's going to have terrible horizontal traverse, not be very effective at shooting somebody to your side, so we're not going to be using that. The next closest option to the Avalanche for another weapon that gives you increased durability would be the Elephant, which is effectively, I know nobody calls it that and it's literally not connected in the tree or anything, but I see the Avalanche as a bigger, better elephant, and thus I see the elephants as baby avalanches. That's not going to be explicitly true by any means, but that's how I choose to see it. So if we were wanting to make a super hyper optimized durability build again, we're not going to be wanting weapons that have a mass of 1,300 each, because every mass that we spend on the weapons is mass that we are not spending on armor. So it would probably theoretically be wise to go with something like the original poster did, which is a lighter weapon. In their case, it was the Waltz. So you actually save a massive amount of mass swapping between the two. So you go from 1,300 mass to 215 mass, although you do get a quarter the durability. So for the sake of trying to max it out, that's probably the route I'd go, because without doing the actual calculation of mass per power score or mass per part cost or whatever, I have a suspicion that Waltz is probably going to be one of, if not the best choices, especially since it's so small and easily concealable on a worm build. And I do have 2 Waltz, and they are actually fused. They aren't giving any values that are particularly pertinent to the maximization we're trying to accomplish here, but we can do that. To be honest, because the Elephant's perk synergizes a lot better, I'm kind of tempted to just do that, because I'm already not absolutely 110% min-maxed because of some other factors. So why not just make a build that's, you know, going to fit within those parameters, those limitations. And the waltz, I don't think, does that. But for the sake of maximizing, I think I will use the waltz. Now, unfortunately, this like changes the build style enormously because the elephant is like twice the size of the waltz, so it needs a lot more space, and therefore it would be harder to put a roof or a back over the weapons to cover them, whereas with the waltz it's basically a given that you are not only able to but should. So this is going to change the style of the build quite a bit, and thus the end result. It'll probably mean that it ends up looking closer to Altruistic Garage's build than otherwise. Well, you know what? For the walls, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to diverge slightly from the build that's already been made and just like effectively one-upping them by putting the same modules down and then using a heavier cabin. I'll make my own heavy version of the build, and then we'll see what values it ends up looking like at the end, and then can go and look at, okay, now if I replace the elephant with the waltz and thus save X amount of mass, and then just slap some armor pieces on, I'm not going to be too concerned at that point about whether or not they're in the optimal placement. Then we can look at the actual value that comes out of that. So this will be looking at running a heavier cabin but also heavier weaponry. I think that'll be a good trade-off. And honestly, a lot more interesting to me personally to see what the results are. Now, it's also worth mentioning that the part count factor is kind of a thing. If I were to run... Quit it. Why are you being so crabby? Running two cannons rather than the one with the avalanche doesn't mean that my total weapon slash module count is going to be 2. I have 2 energy left, so that's at least one other module thrown on the build, most likely 2 other modules thrown on the build. And then there's going to be supporting components, so it's pretty much guaranteed that it's a best in slot option to run the flywheel. So here we're looking at already 3 parts of the part limit devoted to the weaponry, not to mention the fact that we're using a generator, which also has an additional part count cost. So you can see we're already at 13. We'll probably be at 20 by the time we throw in all the functional stuff before looking at armor. And then there's, of course, considerations for things like decor as well. That stuff I'm not going to be super hyper focused on. Again, if you were absolutely wanting to maximize durability under all circumstances, first you'd fuse the hell out of all of these things because each of them makes a huge difference. Secondly, you'd probably look at still running a reload weapon, maybe the kaiju, I suppose, because it doesn't need ammo, which would be an additional part cost, and it doesn't really need a reload booster. So that's an additional part count saved, and you also save the count of only having one weapon rather than multiple. On the other flip side, if you were running something like miniguns or overheat weapons, or I don't know, even gremlins as an example, with only 2 cost each, you'd very easily slap 3 or 4 of these on the build and then still need radiators or coolers or whatnot. I realize as I'm talking about these other weapon choices, namely the kaiju and then of course the waltz in addition to the elephants I currently have on here, this project is probably going to balloon, and I really don't think it's going to end up only being one video. So I guess we'll see how far I'm going to get in this today. But for the sake of this, like, we're already looking at... just going to write this down here. So we already have the cohort with the elephants. Then we might also look at it with 2 times waltz, and then a kaiju weaponry, and all of those would require rebuilds. And again, I'm not going to be too totally focused on that, since I'll have the opportunity to, of course, just swap out the weapons, see what the mass is, recalculate the armor, and then get the value there. But like, there's also things with like me looking at doing the Bastion as well, or doing, for instance, the Humpback would probably be the better option for a worm cabin that's running the Kaiju. So yeah, hopefully one can see how this might get a little complex, especially when we have the mass upgrade on the Bastion already. We could look at the Humpback plus the mass upgrade, or the Duramass, I suppose. And we could also do likewise with the Cohort. That'd be Duramass again, or maybe mass. So yeah, this could balloon pretty quickly. In any case, I wouldn't want to use any non-rotating weapons. And for the most part, that also means that you really aren't going to want to look at a wide variety of ones that can't handle being pummeled pretty heavily anyway. So like, you could run like equalizers, but you probably want that to be on a faster build, not only so that you can get the full benefit of the seal, any other abilities you might have as a result of using a different cabin, thus you're not using a heavy cabin, thus you're not really maximizing for health anymore. Actually, the Millers might be a really good idea, because those are relatively low on mass, still pretty high on energy drain, and they're also fairly tanky. In any case, there's already a limit to the amount of weapons you'd run with a worm configuration, and definitely when you're trying to max out mass. Actually reminds me, I don't know, what is the mass value of this? Durability values? Yeah, so it's only sitting around 3,500, and that's with it maxed out and built almost for the sake of a worm build with fusion. So even here, there's only minimal mass being spent on the non-health giving parts, and it still wasn't breaking much higher. So I guess we'll have to see how much of a difference we can actually make out of the things. I suppose that's part of the benefit of running only 4 meat grinders by using a Ermac cabin instead, because you don't lose a large chunk to the meat grinder itself. Now, of course, because any movement part is going to offer more tonnage than it costs of mass, as long as you're not already at the max, they're going to be a net positive of tonnage. But of course, if you are at the max, then slapping a bunch of other parts down just decreases the mass available and also decreases the acceleration. So that's not the case here per se, but the efficiency of the part is also going to vary. So for instance, this is also actually something I've looked at before. We can look at the efficiency of the mass gain. So the tonnage per mass is the pertinent factor here. So how much more mass you can build without becoming overweight for every point of mass it has. So obviously the helicopter is cracked and not a good example, but you can look at sort of what vehicle movement parts would be more effective or more efficient, and thus you'd need less of the mass spent towards them for hitting a mass of a certain number. So for instance, the meat grinders are very low compared to the overall list, but compared to other non-wheel options, pretty good, honestly. Like, our highest non-wheel option looks to be the Sleipnirs with a 4.9, and the meat grinders like slap right in the middle of between that and the legs, or the like 2 Icarus variants. So barring making a wheeled build instead, you might not really have the ability to make a better, more efficient movement anyway. I mean, while some of these values are, yes, higher, like for instance the hermits are ridiculously high, the amount you need to use in order to hit those thresholds is crazy. So for instance with the Icarus 4, even though it's a lot more efficient, you're only gaining half the tonnage. So you're going to have to spend twice as many parts on the movement parts just to get the same total mass. So that's actually something I think I was actually on the cabin spinning and I just didn't mention it. Yeah, so the calculation for a given item and fusion, how many of the movement parts you need. So if we do the meat grinder and we look at a mass engine cohort without a tonnage or weight fuse, then we need 6.2. Obviously we're running 6. But if I was running something that was quote-unquote more efficient, like the Icarus 4, need nearly 13 of them, which would eat into the part count pretty significantly. So again, without doing some math, I say some math, probably a lot of math, to actually determine like the absolute ideal, which I think is honestly probably going to have to be its own video, is just like hypothetically with everything maxed out. But for the sake of this, I think the meat grinders strike a pretty good balance due to not having the worst rate and then offering a pretty sizable amount of tonnage. The Sleipnir or the hardened tracker, the other two options, obviously their higher speed caps means they're probably better off running with a tonnage engine, so in theory you could need even less. If we go to the cabins list again, if we were running the, let's see, the hardened tracks as an example, and if we were running with a tonnage engine, we would need less of the parts because the tonnage engine offers some of it. So you could get away with running 7 hardened tracks, for instance. So that would give you a better tonnage to mass ratio, going from 3.5 to 4.6, which again is pretty much as good as you're going to get for non-wheels. And then you're only spending 1 additional part on it, assuming that you're running the tonnage engine, of course. And if you are running the tonnage engine, then you're saving a bunch of mass because you're not running the, you know, mass engines, which are also notoriously heavy. So yeah, I'm not going to worry about doing all the math on this stream because I have no reason to believe it would be anywhere near as quick as I want it to be, or the stream to be. It's already at the 40-minute mark. So just for the sake of getting something built and getting a final value, I think the meat grinders will be a fine example. This would be so much better if you didn't minimize every time I wasn't clicked on you, bro. That's horrible. Alright, I guess I'll just deal with it. Anyway, so part count is sitting here. The original poster said that their last energy point was spent on a Omamori connected to the 2 waltz. Now, if you're actually running something small, like, for instance, the waltz, that's easy enough to do, and they can rotate freely around them. Unfortunately, if we're running the elephants, these things are massive. And also their base is smaller than their physical mesh, so you can actually see their placement is a 4x4 grid. But the mesh is actually closer to like a 6x6 with the corners cut out. So that's actually one of my many grievances with the elephant. But because of that, or regardless of that, despite it obviously being a factor, there is no good way for you to fit 2 of these beside each other in a way that lets them rotate freely. So this is like the best I could do, and even then it's honestly it's garbage. and like linking the Omamori to the cabin as well as a question is just straight out. So I'm thinking like best case scenario would probably honestly be just running an averter instead of the Omamori, so that you have the like constant damage resistance. Link it to the cabin, maybe link it to one of the guns, and then suffer from it taking a long ass time to turn around if you go from one side to the other. I don't know. The decisions to be made, neither of them are good, to be honest. Because even if I push this thing out as much as possible, it's not going to be able to rotate around the cabin. It's going to have to go all the way around. So it's going to be really long. And I'm going to try and limit that wherever reasonable. Like with the worm builds, I did actually still use a trombone, just increasing the weapon damage of it because it's like a worm focused on dealing damage rather than tanking. So neither of the variants that I have... Oh, sorry, actually this one still runs the averter. This one is definitely just connected to the cabin though. I can't really get a good angle, but you can see it underneath the radar. So not boosting the weaponry at all. Whereas with the original version that Bang Shield had, I believe it was touching one of the weapons and the cabin, or the cabin and some additional modules or something like that. I think it's very much going to have to be the same thing here, where if I do it at all, it's going to be only touching a couple of things at most, unlike the OP who had the averter that definitely touched both weapons. Hopefully the significantly increased durability of the elephants and the ability to increase durability further with the cohort perk as well as the elephant perk is hopefully going to be enough. Without an additional damage resistance module, but it's just going to be a look about and find out. I don't really know what or if there'd be a better point to be spent on, like, or sorry, no, I don't think they said they use, no, they said they used the Omamori and the Interceptor, I believe, and that they didn't use the reloading module, which makes sense for the Waltz, they reload rather fast. But there are other defensive options like that. You could run the Interceptor. You could theoretically swap out the reload booster for a Aegis Prime, which is interesting. It says special module now as its subtype. I don't believe that's what it was as before, but whatever. They said they made a bunch of text updates. You could run the Aegis Prime, although without the Cheetah engine or a faster build or Bigfoot wheels to like get the charge back faster. That would be like a once per combat thing at most. And it's only going to be like, I don't know, 1,000 health. I don't actually know the value of it. So, like, stacking further into damage resistance is, I think, the way I want to go. I don't think a cloaking module or a radar is going to make too big of a difference. For that sake, I'm also going to need ammo. I don't actually even know if one box is going to be enough. I feel like it should be. I guess it depends how high a power score you're taking this thing into. 30. Could probably get away with that, but just to be on the safe side, I'm going to slap 2 of these down. If you had a single fused one, it should be fine. Good news is, with all the use I have of the cohort, I know exactly where I want to put those. Yeah, that'll be good. Bad news is that it's not necessarily a good spot. Not even, like, normally, but, like, especially on a worm build, because it does have these nice built-in fenders, which can fit the boxes. Very convenient. But, we're gonna probably not want to have our sides exposed on a worm build, so I don't know if that'll turn out to be a good idea or not. Probably don't need a neutrino because we're going to be fairly CQC and we don't want the scope shot off or for it to get moving the viewpoint. Probably won't want fuel tanks since we'll be at like 14,000 power score by the time we're done with this. Yeah, I don't know, I kind of feel like the inverter's the way to go. That might not end up actually being the answer, but it's kind of the one I'm leaning to right now, especially because I can do this. Actually, I guess this is better. Okay, great. So we have, I think, probably the final count of all of the parts that we'd be using. Whether or not this is the actual placement or if like certain things get swapped out or whatnot. But this gives us sort of a base of what we can expect for armoring. But I don't even have frames down. Okay, let's get that set up. That should also let us get a pretty good idea of where the armor or where the other modules will go. So because I want to have the phone call apparently in a memento. Because of the experience I had with running the humpback and getting weapons mounted in a way that the cabin didn't block the rotation, I know for a fact that I want to do likewise here and have the weapon being able to rotate behind the cabin directly. Unfortunately, because the elephant is massive, looks like I'm not going to have much option to do that, at least in a way where it's directly attached via a frame. Oh, and this rotation speed is definitely going to kill me. By that logic too, I don't even want to run the ammo containers like that, the fender things, because then you actually lose a very small amount of angle of the weapon by being able to shoot. So you definitely have to look at least running multiple frames between the cabin and the weapon. And then of course the second one's also going to need a monstrous amount of space. So if I were to plan for, say, a width of 6. Yeah, it looks like I need it that far back. Oh, yeah, the 6. I can see why we'd maybe rather prefer the walls. Because the other elephant ain't going to be any better. Well, it looks like it actually is a lot nicer for the overlap. It's just a massive amount of space in between the first one that I do not like. Not at all. Or, you know, how large this thing is. I can't even, like, bury it down either like I can with, like, other weaponry like the whirls. pretty sure. Yeah, not very easily. I'd have to make this thing at least 8 wide. Looks like this is still gonna completely axe the gun depression. Yeah, so the second one there at the back is gonna have issues hitting anything. Or even on a small hill. So I'm thinking maybe not worrying about sinking it and just keeping it on the frames. Armoring these kind of sucks. You wouldn't even really be able to fender them in at all, I don't think. Yeah, I suppose the plus side being that, like, oh look, you don't need this. Does that not interfere with it at all? That's kind of funny. Well, there's the one plus so far, I guess. Honestly, elephants might straight up be like the worst weapon to do this on. These things just do not want to play nice with any of the facets that would actually make this build successful. Oh man. Alright, well let's assume we do it that way. This is so much weight being devoted to frames. Yeah, you know, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and say that, like, if you want to have a warm build and have a dummy amount of health, this is probably not the way to go about doing it. Man, this sucks. These weapons aren't protected at all. Basically, all of my armor would have to go to making a roof rather than being underslung. Eagle's super awkward shape does not make this any easier either. Weapons are just waiting to be destructed to death. Oh, this is so not good. We're down to so little mass, too. Oh great, and those are in the way. Well, that's not surprising, I suppose. At least it's pretty marginal. This thing's fucking chunky. Very unnecessarily so, I think. You know, I feel like more than anything all this is doing is establishing I don't know how to make worms. Okay, well let's just pretend for a moment that this is a good build. Because it definitely does not feel like it's going to be. But let's pretend. And if we were to slap on some parts for the sake of decor, for getting that rep bonus. Then maybe it would kind of look like that before we add any armor. And then if we had our handy dandy calculator, which is probably going to take way too long to develop. And if we say, okay, we have 26,000 mass before we hit our limit, so say 259. Minus our current mass of 19,219, we have that much mass left to work with. We have that many parts to work with, and we want as much durability as possible. So we can do a couple of different options, because obviously both of these are restrictions. So the question is, I suppose, how do we account for both in a maximization formula? Because we can just do whatever parts via mass, so X mass per part, but that's not necessarily going to give us the most durability. But let's say we did that calculation. Then we could look at our best parts for durability. Where the mass is preserved. Because if we just do the calculation per mass, it's going to prefer all these light parts, which we don't really care to actually do. So let's say We did that. Then I don't want anything with about 160 durability and hoping that that gives the most durability. Or I guess we could do per mass. Because it is what we're trying to maximize for. And then I guess whatever calculation gives us the most mass. Maybe. We're looking for the best durability per mass. Durability per part. Looking for the most durability for a given mass. Most durability for a given part, but most parts will have a preference for durability per mass or durability per part. So I guess we'd kind of want whatever is closest to the 161 mass per part, decreasing order of durability per mass, I think. At the very least, that's going to give us the most. Durability per mass. Well, let's try and go that route. So we'll do part, oops, count math going on. So we will get the amount of parts here. We're going to look it up in the C. And we're going to return the count of that part. And then we're going to get the mass total via the quantity times just the total mass, and then we can do this minus the sum of whatever parts we slap on here to give us the amount of parts we have left, and then the target mass per part. Likewise, gives us the amount of mass we have left to work with. Nice. So now I can just continue down the list and throw on any ones that are gonna work. So pretty much anything in the ballpark of 150. So we'll throw on some minivan panels. Oopsie. Let's see, what range are we doing? Q64, S64, Butte. So why don't we copy that functionality down? Oh. Right. So we got our minivan panel. Throw on some rear doors. Maybe throw on some canvas. Oops. Guess I could have just auto-generated the list based off of how close it was to the value. But that would be circular unless I just had this be a fixed value rather than an updating calculation. So I'll just leave it as this for now. Or on some of the heavier pieces, maybe. So the Mempo, this Coro, slides it down to 150-ish. Still do some heavier ones, so Corda nose cut. What? That can't be right. Assembly sections. What? Those values are actually correct. There are 2 Dodge Children parts with identical durability. Okay, well I guess we'll use both of them. Guess we probably should have also gotten the durability. What is our current durability on the build? It is 1161. And then that will be multiplied by 10% because of the durability fusion on the cabin. So we got our assembly sections down to 125-ish. So we can maybe add back some of the lighter ones we ignored before. That is over the part limit, so maybe we remove hot rod hood and the cord nose cut. Oh yeah, whatever. That does not get us anywhere near the amount of durability we'd be looking for. But let's throw those parts along just for the sake of checking the math being correct. So we had power slide. Shall put, yeah, I'm not even pressing left stick, what the hell? Why are we drifting? Oh, that's annoying. It's weird too, because it seems to be reading me like I'm just pressing right stick right now and it's not doing the suicide prompt that it would if it were actually interpreting the left stick. Yes, it shouldn't be, so I don't know what it's doing. I did just start listening. Okay, weird. Alright, well, we have our one power slide. And then we've got, these are still not sorted in an order that would make sense. Minivan panels. Got 3 rear doors. Six canvas roof. Two Trino bonnets. Four airplane interior. One Mumpo, one Socorro. The assembly platforms. Avia double slopes. Narrow wings. And then Avia fenders. That gives us 4607 durability, where it would have been calculated as 4442.3. So what did we do wrong? The power slide is 68 durability, rear door is 89 durability, times 3, minivan is 64 times 2, canvas roof is 61 times 6, Trino bonnet is 192, airplane interior is 332, Mempo 113, 113, 1782, 344, 228, 212, 448. So all of those are correct. So I guess maybe the durability thing calculation is different than I expected. I do not know. In any case, that does not get us very high on the durability, but what I can do is make a armoring of the build and then test it out in easy raid, because at this point, why not? really is a lot of armor once you lay it all out. Not so sure I can even really honestly do a roof very well, because of how large of areas these need. I won't even be able to put down any support pillars in the middle. So if they shoot off the back and the front, the entire thing pops. But you know what, whatever. It doesn't need to be perfect. Just for the sake of testing stuff. Bro, what? Oh my god, they're not symmetrical. Why? Well, that does make things more difficult.